It is impossible to know exactly what happened, but we can piece together some things in an intelligent and logical fashion.
People don't realize that there are potential killers among them. Be able to see we can identify these dangerous people.
The scene had been staged in order to convey an impression.
How could anyone live in a society where people they liked, loved, lived with, worked with, and admired could the next day turn out to be the most demonic people imaginable?
Springfield, Illinois is known as the state's capital. It's located an hour and a half north from St. Louis, Missouri, and about 3.5 hours south from Chicago, Illinois. Mark and Donnah Winger lived in Springfield with their daughter Bailey. Mark worked as a technician at the Illinois Department of Nuclear Safety. He obtained his degree at the Virginia Military Institute. While they were dating, Donnah worked as an operating room technician for a plastic surgeon in Hollywood, Florida, while Mark worked as a physician for a producer of lab instruments in Riviera Beach, Florida. Before they were married, they had their engagement announcement printed in the July 17, 1988 issue of the New York Times. Donnah's family had a history of working in the paper business. Her mother was a partner in a newspaper distributing company in New York, and her grandfather was the circulation director for the New York Times before he passed away. Donnah's father worked as an insurance agent. Mark's father worked as a technical manager at a factory in Cleveland, Ohio that filled aerosol cans, and his mother was a realtor agent in Ohio. Donnah and Mark had adopted Bailey when she was only 3 months old. The couple had tried to have their own children before deciding to adopt, and Donnah was very excited to be a new mother. In August 1995, 32-year-old Donnah was traveling with her daughter Bailey, who was about a year old. They were returning from a week-long visit with her parents in Florida to their home in Springfield, Illinois. They were traveling by air and decided to take the airport shuttle service from St. Louis, Missouri, back to Springfield. During the hour-and-a-half-long drive, Donnah said the driver was asking her strange questions and that he talked about sex parties. He said he heard voices in his head that told him to kill people and spoke of his spirit guide, Dom. She said he was all over the road and driving over the speed limit. When she arrived home, Donnah wrote a letter documenting her experience with the driver. A passage from the letter says, "I felt as if my life and the life of my daughter were in the hands of a nut." After discussing the events with her husband Mark, he called BART, the airport shuttle company, to complain about his wife's experience, and soon after, the driver was suspended. On August 29, 1995, around 4:30 p.m., Mark Winger made 2 frantic phone calls to 911.
911 emergency, what's emergency?
Help me! My God, my wife's breathing.
Okay, you need an ambulance?
I need everything. I need everything.
Springfield Police.
Yes, help me.
What's the problem?
I just shot this man in my house.
He's inside your house
He
right
killed my
now?
wife. He beat my wife.
Is he in there right now?
Yes, sir.
Does he have a gun?
Her brains are everywhere.
Where's the man at?
He's laying on the floor.
Is he dead?
I don't know. He's making weird sounds.
Sir.
20.
Sir.
20.
Sir,
20,
slow
25.
down. I can't understand you. Slow down. Is the man still in your house?
Yes, he's laying there on the floor with a bullet in his head.
Did you shoot him?
Yes, I shot him. He was killing my wife. Please, my baby's crying. My baby's crying. I gotta go. I'll call you right back.
When Mark hung up the phone, the police department called him back.
Hello?
Winger?
Yes, yes.
This is the police department. We've got officers en route. I need to know what's going on there.
My wife is dying on the floor.
Okay, is she still alive?
I think so.
Okay, we've got ambulance en route and we've got police officers en route. Where is the gun?
I left it on the table. It's on the table. It's on the table. God, please come here.
We've got people on the way.
Okay.
Who is this man?
I don't know who he is.
He's still inside the house?
Yes, he's laying on the floor. Okay, I gotta hold my wife. I gotta get to my wife.
Okay, are you Mark Winger?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Okay, and your wife is Donnah?
Yes, she is.
When did the man come here?
I know, a few minutes ago. Wait, I gotta get to my wife. Please, just let me get to my wife. I won't hang up. Okay?
Okay, we've got officers en route.
Okay, my door's open.
Okay.
Okay.
The paramedics were the first to arrive at the scene. They found Donnah face down on the dining room floor. She was barely clinging to life. The first responding officer noticed pools of blood around both victims, with blood spatter all over the walls and ceiling. The man Mark had shot was found only a few feet away from Donnah, laying on his back. Donnah and the man were rushed to hospital, where soon after arriving, both were pronounced dead. Donnah's father talks about finding out she had been killed.
I got a call from my daughter, Michelle. She said, Donnah was murdered today, Dad. Somebody beat Donnah to death with a hammer. I remember throwing the phone down and standing there and screaming. And I knew that my life would never be the same again.
Investigators didn't find any sign of forced entry to the house and assumed the door was locked and Donnah had left the baby alone in the bedroom when she went to answer the door. Photographs were taken of the blood spatter and weapons at the scene by the forensic investigators, although the crime scene had already been contaminated by the paramedics. The first officer who was on the scene arrived after paramedics but before the investigators and made a quick decision that would drastically help the investigation.
I saw a lady on the floor, non-responsive, and then just 5 feet away from her, I saw a gentleman laying on the carpet. He looked like he had a severe head injury. I realized that they're going to probably load and run, so I knew that detectives would never have an opportunity to see exactly what the crime scene looked like before they got there. I ran out to the back of my car, and I remembered I had my Polaroid camera in the trunk. I grabbed it, I ran back into the house, and I immediately snapped 3 pictures. I wanted to show the correlation between where the two of them were lying in relationship to each other, in relationship to a hammer that was laying on the carpet next to the gentleman, and then I realized that was my last picture. I only had 3 pictures in the camera at the time.
The officer filed his report with the Polaroid photos and thought that those investigating the case would surely take the time to read his report and look at the photos within the next 48 hours. Mark told police he was downstairs in the basement on the treadmill when he heard a loud thump, or a thud, coming from upstairs. He said he ran upstairs to his bedroom, where he saw his infant daughter laying on the bed alone. He was worried, so he grabbed his gun from his nightstand, then ran down the hallway towards the dining room where he saw a man kneeling next to Donnah beating her with a hammer. Mark said he shot the man in the head once and he fell backwards onto the floor. When he saw the man get back up and lift his shoulders off the ground, he fired a second shot into his forehead. Investigators asked Mark if he touched the hammer at any point during the event to explain why they might find his bloody prints on the hammer. He said when he sat on the floor to check on Donnah, he got angry when he could hear the man moaning and groaning while his wife lay still on the floor, so he picked up the hammer and hit the man in the chest to silence him. That's when Mark called 911. He said he hung up on the operator when he heard his baby crying. As police spoke to Mark, they said he was visibly upset and asking if his wife was going to live. He kept asking them who the man was on his floor. As officers tried to console him, Mark asked for a soda from his fridge. When the investigator went to the fridge, he noticed a handwritten letter on yellow paper stuck to the fridge. As the investigator was returning to the bedroom with the soda for Mark, Donnah and Roger were being taken to the ambulance from the dining room. Before being taken to the hospital, officers checked the man's pocket and found a wallet. Inside, they found his ID, which read Roger Harrington. One of the investigators, Detective Charles, had actually met Roger Harrington before.
I had actually dealt with Roger Harrington in the past. I used to own a mobile home park in town, and his girlfriend at that time were living in one of the mobile homes that I rented. And I had, on 2 occasions, had to go to the mobile home and break up disturbances between the two. He had not caused any physical harm to her, but he was capable at that time of becoming quite violent and snapping very quickly. So the information that Mark Winger was providing and the information that I already had helped me form the opinion that it's very possible that this guy did as Mr. Winger had told us he had done.
When they informed Mark of the man's name, he told police he knew the man. He said the man had been stalking Donnah and harassing their family for the past week. Mark mentioned that the letter Donnah had written about her experience with the shuttle service driver was still on the refrigerator. He told investigators that Roger was the driver and that he had lost his job as a result of their complaint. Mark said he felt Roger decided to get revenge on the couple for losing his job. One of the investigators excused himself from the room and stepped outside. He noticed a car parked on the road in the front of the house that didn't look like it belonged in the neighborhood, as it was older and had not been washed in some time. He asked an officer at the scene if they checked the plates to see who the car belonged to. It came back to belonging to Roger. When he took a closer look in the car, he found a note laying on the front seat that had the Winger's address and the time 4:30 written on it. He also saw many items that could be used as weapons, including a knife and a tire iron with tape wrapped around the top as a handle. The hammer at the scene belonged to the couple. Donnah had asked Mark to hang a hat rack in the kitchen for her and set the hammer and the hat rack on the dining room table so that Mark wouldn't forget to do it. A few other items found at one end of the dining room table was a transport mug and a pack of cigarettes which belonged to Roger. Investigators discovered that Roger had a history of mental illness. One of his intake evaluations described Roger as having a belief of a spirit that he describes as inherent inhabiting him. He called it his Dom spirit, and that it has some suggestions for him. There was also something that had to do with self-destruction and mass destruction. And although it certainly got their attention and got mentioned in their narrative about the description of their hour-long visit, that it never approached the level of concern where they would call a supervisor or a psychiatrist and didn't question whether he was truly suicidal or homicidal. In fact, almost near the very last entry, the concern was that this is probably a personality disorder. The initial diagnosis was that in the records, first of all, from a psychiatrist who had evaluated him at the age of 22 was adjustment disorder. That was also at a time when he was having problems with his wife, and one day he came home, found out that she was moving out. He didn't want her to move out. There was an altercation. She alleged that he hit her and kicked her and got an order of protection. The report also claimed that Roger had a history of recurrent acute abuse of alcohol and cannabis and suggested he had schizotypal personality disorder. He had been admitted to the hospital for treatment twice. While police were investigating the scene, Donnah's best friend Deanne Schultz arrived, and soon investigators were talking to her to see if she could give them some insight into the events surrounding Donnah's and Roger's death. Deanne starts by telling them about Donnah's airport shuttle ride with Roger. She said she insisted that Donnah call the police because she said she was terrified. Deanne said she herself had called the police to ask them if they could check Donnah's property to make sure she was safe. Deanne said that Donnah was receiving prank phone calls to the house and said she had even picked up the phone to one of these calls. She said she could tell by their voice and demeanor that the person on the phone was mentally ill. Investigators went to Roger's residence to collect evidence. When they arrived, they talked to his roommates and told them what Roger was accused of doing. His roommates insisted Roger couldn't be responsible for such an act. They told police that Roger had received a call from Mark Winger at their home that afternoon. When he got off the phone, he told his roommates that Mark called and gave him the impression that he wanted to talk to him about his suspension from the shuttle company and hopefully work things out so Roger could get his job back. He gave Roger his address and asked him to be there at 4:30. When police asked Mark about phoning Roger, he said he called to try to sort things out, but all Roger kept talking about was the Dom spirit, saying how it directed him to talk to Donnah because she was so pretty. Mark said he hung up on Roger. When they searched Roger's house, they found a Halloween mask that Roger was said to talk to and refer to as Dom. Mark was praised by many for trying to save his wife, and everyone seemed sympathetic towards him as he was now left to raise his daughter on his own. Mark sent a letter to the editor of the newspaper, which was published, thanking everyone for their support before and after Donnah's death. He mentioned how the couple had moved to Springfield 5 years prior to Donnah's death, and talked about how the people who supported him would be remembered. Soon after Donnah's death, Mark hired a nanny to help him care for his daughter. Roger Harrington's family members were confused with what police were telling them. His mother said she didn't think Roger was capable of something so violent.
I never have ever seen Roger be violent to anybody.
When investigators talked to neighbors, one said that she was unloading her groceries from the car when she heard the first shot, and she didn't hear the second shot until about 5 minutes later when she was inside her house. One of the investigators on the case, Doug Williamson, thought the scene didn't seem to match Mark's account of what happened. At one point, he and his partner Charles Cox went to Mark's house to test to see if it was possible for Mark to hear a banging noise from upstairs when the treadmill was on. Doug insisted he couldn't hear Charles jumping up and down on the floor upstairs. Doug remembers Mark's behavior on the day of the deaths as being abnormal for the situation, and a number of other things about the case just didn't seem right to him.
When I first saw Mark Winger, it just seemed like something was wrong with the way he was acting. He would give the indication that he was crying. As a matter of fact, I offered him some Kleenex. I saw that he had no tears. I saw that he had a white t-shirt wrapped around his left hand. He had already cleaned up before we got there. He had changed his clothing already. We told Mark Winger several times, Donnah is still alive. She has been taken to the hospital. They are working on her. She is still alive. And he never, ever asked for us to drive him there or to go to the hospital to be with his wife. And that was odd. I believe that Mark sent me to get that soda so I would read that note, because that is the motive that explains who is laying on the dining room floor. So there were some indicators to me that just didn't sit well. It was apparent to me that everyone believed that Mark Winger was a hero in this case, and that the case would be closed within a matter of a day or two. When I observed the car parked on the street facing the wrong way in front of the Winger residence, it was a very good indication to me that the person driving that was not trying to be inconspicuous. Upon looking inside, it did have a handwritten note on the front seat that appeared to indicate that there was a meeting with Mark Winger at 4:30. Roger Harrington had access to weapons and would have entered the house with those, but we were supposed to believe that he just happened to have the luck that a hammer was laying on that table and that he hit Donnah in the head, killing her. There's always an explanation. Well, maybe Donnah saw him and, she's easygoing. She let him in, figured Mark would take care of it. Detective Cox and I were at odds about what the crime scene told us. He basically said, no, you're wrong. That day of the murder, and for at least several weeks, if not months after the murder occurred, most people at the police department that were there on the scene thought that Mark's story was true.
Doug's partner, Charles Cox, wasn't as easily convinced that the scene had been staged.
It could all be explained away if he went in to talk and snapped it and just used a weapon of opportunity there. Doug hits on a lot of little things. It's not that his concerns aren't important. It's that sometimes they don't mean everything he thinks they mean. He's the type of person that don't like loose ends. It bothers him all the time. Well, this was my case, and it was closed in a matter of a day.
When they shared their thoughts with their superiors, they agreed with Charles and said the case was closed within a day. Detective Doug Williamson didn't feel right about the case being closed so quickly. Charles said Doug just couldn't let the case go.
I would talk him down and tell him that it's over, it's done, leave it go. I said, you're killing yourself here, not getting any sleep, and you're going to end up with ulcers. And I said, just let it go. There's always things you can't answer in a case. You just got to let them go.
Doug explains why he wasn't being taken seriously.
The fact that I was a rookie and had very little experience compared to others, my opinions were discounted fairly quickly. I vividly remember not only that they were discounted, but I was ridiculed over them. It was a gut feeling, it was an instinct, but I had reasons to back that up.
If investigators were to believe everything everyone told them, the truth would never have a chance at being revealed. Questioning the stories of others has been considered impolite because it infers that the person is being deceptive, and being a liar is seen as a negative thing, and people usually want to avoid negative attention. It's not right that anyone would have to endure ridicule from coworkers for bringing to their attention the possibility that their case may not have been fully investigated, especially when they are the sole industry whose job it is to explain the true circumstances that occurred surrounding a death. There is always a story to be told when a victim is found, or from what is found at the crime scene. It's possible to recreate scenarios to explain exactly what happened, but some interpretations of crime scenes can be easily manipulated. About a month after Donnah and Roger's death, Mark called up Detective Charles Cox.
I felt like he was pumping me to find out if we had opened it back up or if we were still looking into it. So I just told him, no, it's closed. It's been closed. As far as, I'm concerned, you're still my hero.
Detective Doug thought it was interesting that Mark would be reaching out to the police about the investigation.
Even as a new homicide investigator, one of the things that is very basic in the training is you always look to see why people are injecting themselves into the investigation.
On December 29, 1995, 4 months after Donnah's death, Mark filed a wrongful death suit against the airport shuttle service BART, suing them for millions of dollars. The main argument of the lawsuit was that his adopted daughter, Bailey, would grow up without a mother in her life, so Mark sued for the loss of his daughter's mother. That wasn't the last time Charles heard from Mark Winger. A few months later, Mark went to the police station to ask for his gun back because it was a gift.
A month or two after that, he come back in again. I had never experienced anyone come in and talk to me for that long that was involved in a homicide case. Usually you never hear from any of them again. There didn't seem to be any sadness in him. We got a release and was able to release the gun to him. I immediately got a hold of Doug and told him, something isn't right.
This was exactly the attitude Doug needed from Charles.
That is the straw that broke the camel's back to prove to Detective Cox that Mark Winger was lying. To me, that didn't mean anything. Him asking for the gun back did not mean anything. It doesn't to this day. To Detective Cox, that meant everything.
Charles explained how the two had to convince their superiors of their suspicions of Mark.
So we went to the bosses. It was a hard case to reopen because first I had to come out and admit that I was wrong in the conclusions that I had drawn. They said, no, it's just a gut feeling. You don't have nothing concrete here. We're not going to let you embarrass this man because of his stature in the community. Even though this case was closed, me and Doug would have discussions about the case and different feelings we had. It just bothered us.
Without permission to look into the case, the detectives were unable to continue to gather evidence. It seemed to them that they were watching Mark get away with murder. 1 year after Donnah and Roger died, in 1996, Mark married his daughter's nanny, and soon after, the two welcomed a new baby to the family. While they were engaged, Mark paid another visit to Charles at the police station. Mark told Charles that he was marrying his daughter's nanny, and then again inquired in the case, wondering if everything was closed. Charles found this quite odd, but his hands were tied. In September 1997, Donna's family wanted to create something in her memory. They dedicated a playroom in her honor at the Joe DiMaggio Children's Hospital in Hollywood, Florida. Donna's stepfather spoke at the opening of the playroom.
We are making goodness from evil tonight. Mark Winger, thankfully, has straightened his life around, but only after many, many months of difficult adversities and tribulations.
The case stalled for police until 1999. It turns out investigators weren't the only ones questioning Mark's involvement. The insurance company for the transportation company BART had informed the police that they had started their own investigation into Mark after he sued for the wrongful death claim. That same year, Charles had attended a blood spatter analysis conference in Louisville, Kentucky. This is where he met blood spatter analysis expert Tom Bevel. Charles approached Tom after the presentation and asked if he could take a look at Donnah and Roger's case.
I got talking with Mr. Bevel about the case, and he told me to send him some photographs and also, if I could, get him some samples of the blood spatters on the victim's clothing and the husband's clothing.
Tom described his conversation with Charles.
I was informed originally as to the first investigation. I requested an opportunity to look at the clothing, and that was how I got started.
The job that I was asked to do was to convey my analysis of the physical evidence to the detectives as to my opinion as to what it said.
When the two detectives went to collect the evidence to be tested by Tom, Doug said it wasn't as easy as they thought it might be.
All the evidence had been signed out by Mr. Michael Metnick, who was the counsel for Mark Winger in the lawsuit against BART Transportation.
The wrongful death suit was in the paper for anyone in town to see. One person who took notice of the article was Donnah's best friend, Deanne Schultz. Deanne was still taking her death pretty hard. She spent time in the hospital and even tried convulsive shock therapy because she was so depressed. One day, Deanne decided to unburden herself and told her doctor that she knew more about her friend's death than she was telling, and she was ready to tell someone. The doctor helped Deanne get in touch with the authorities, who set up a meeting for her with the local prosecutor. She agreed to tell them what she knew. Prosecutors agreed to give her immunity in the case if she agreed to be truthful with them and answer their questions. Deanne told investigators that she had been having an affair with Mark before and after Donnah's death. She said she believed her depression was caused by her suspicions of Mark's involvement in Donnah and Roger's deaths. She said from what Mark was telling her before Donnah's death, she thought Mark wanted her dead to get out of their marriage. She said when Donnah told Mark about her experience with the airport shuttle service, he knew this was his opportunity to get out of his marriage. Deanne said she thought her and Mark would be together as they had even purchased wedding rings. But soon after Donnah's death, Mark pushed her away to try to distance himself from her so it wouldn't look like Mark had been cheating on Donnah. When investigators asked Deanne why she hadn't come to them sooner, she explained that Mark told her that if she said anything, she would look just as guilty as him. After Donnah's death, Mark didn't marry her, but instead married his daughter's babysitter, Rebecca Simic, and the two had a child and adopted 2 more children together. When investigators asked Mark about Deanne's account of the past, Mark said she was making it up, that it was just to get back at him for not wanting to be with her. Deanne was able to give police receipts for hotel rooms that her and Mark had used, and her phone records show the two were in regular contact. In December 1999, the insurance company for BART filed papers accusing Mark of murdering both their driver and his wife. Police informed Mark's attorney that they would be needing the evidence back because they were reopening the case. The lawsuit against BART was soon dropped, and Mark now had to prepare a defense for double homicide. The clothing evidence was sent to Tom Bevel first, and he started by examining the shirts Mark and Roger were wearing. If Roger was striking Donnah, as Mark had said, her blood would have landed on Roger's shirt, but the only blood found on his shirt was his own. He checked Roger's socks and shoes for blood spatter, and they were clean. Inconsistencies in Mark's story started to become more obvious. When paramedics arrived, they found Donnah face down on the floor with Mark kneeling beside her. He said that he cradled her in his arms as he waited for help, but if this were the case, why did paramedics have to roll Donnah onto her back when they found her? If Mark was telling the truth, that means he set her face down on the floor after cradling her to have her in the position she was found when the paramedics arrived. Mark's t-shirt was covered in Donnah's blood. Tom explained how the blood pattern on the shirt can tell the story of how it got there.
The blood spatter that is found on Mark's shirt, very curious. The very saturated blood staining is certainly not a problem. He says that he held his wife, cradled her, but there is spatter that is getting onto the shirt, and in my opinion, the best explanation here is that spatter is coming from an impact. What we typically refer to is medium velocity blood spatter. That is blood that has received an impact of some sort. That usually produces stains that range from about 2 millimeters up to about 4 millimeters.
The blood spatter on the shirt showed drops of Donnah's blood, which resembled cast-off stains on the right sleeve and many drops of medium velocity spatter around the collar. This would be consistent with Mark hitting Donnah while holding the hammer in his right hand and creating the spatter as he hit her multiple times. This indicated Mark was closer to Donnah during the attack, making it more likely he was the one hitting Donnah, not Roger. There was still some evidence to be collected from Mark's lawyer from when they had collected it for the lawsuit against the airport shuttle service. Detective Cox was assigned the task of picking up the last of the evidence. As Charles was leaving, one of the paralegals in the office asked if he wanted the Polaroids.
Polaroids? Yes, we want the Polaroids. Because that's first I heard of them, and I'm thinking, what? Officer Dave Behringer was one of the first officers that responded and started taking pictures of the positions of the bodies because he knew that the ambulance and medical personnel was going to dramatically change that scene.
When Charles showed his partner the Polaroids, Doug realized how they were missed.
Officer Behringer had left the scene and probably booked those Polaroids into evidence prior to us even leaving the scene. The fact that the case was closed quickly did not allow us to review all of the evidence in the manner we should have.
The detective sent the remaining evidence to Tom for analysis. During the initial investigation, the crime scene photos weren't compared to Mark's statement of events. When he reviewed the 3 Polaroids taken before the victims were moved, he found their bodies weren't in a position that was consistent with the way Mark described to police. Mark told police that after he grabbed the gun from the side table in the bedroom, he ran down the hall and shot Roger the first time in the top of his head as he came upon Roger beating his wife with the hammer. Mark claimed Roger fell backwards off Donnah, and when he started to lean back up on his shoulders, Mark shot the second shot into the forehead. But in the photos, it appeared that Roger's body was moved before Mark shot him a second time because there were 2 pools of Roger's blood on the floor. Tom thought that the smaller pool began to form as a result of Roger landing face down after he was shot the first time in the top of his head. Then he was rolled over onto his back after laying there for a moment and shot for a second time in the forehead. The larger pool of blood formed as he was laying in the same spot until paramedics arrived. The motion of Roger being turned over left a clean spot on the floor between the 2 bloodstains. When the clear spot was measured, it was the same length as Roger's shoulder width. This gave strength to the fact that the neighbor heard a pause between the 2 shots. Roger was laying to the right of Donnah, almost parallel. Their feet and heads were pointed in the same direction. Roger's head was even with Donnah's waist, and the 2 were a few feet away from each other. Tom Bevel explains why Mark's versions of events were physically impossible in relation to how Roger was found.
We're able to see the intruder, and his feet are completely away from Donnah's feet. He, in fact, would almost have had to have levitated, rotated 180 degrees, floated downfield, and then landed down, which doesn't happen in today's physics.
He would literally have to either do a backflip or levitate or some sort of a circus act in order to get his feet pointing away from her body, as well as the length of his body, his height, also away from her.
Donnah's blood was found on the walls and ceiling in the dining room near the doorway leading to the front entrance of the home. It seemed that Donnah was walking down the hall towards the dining room when she was attacked and attempted to leave the house by turning towards the front door. Tom explains how the blood pattern on the wall was inconsistent with Mark's version of events.
And what this tells me is that the position capable of getting the blood on the ceiling as well as the wall places the attacker facing the wall, swinging in a natural position like this. And this is inconsistent with the story that is given by Winger, simply from the standpoint that the bullet into the top of the head, you can't be facing here and turn around and duck like that without it being very awkward in order to get that shot. However, the position he's trying to place him in makes it easy to get the shot, but it's inconsistent with the blood spatter that we have on the wall.
Mark's gun was retrieved and tested. They found that when the shells were ejected, they fell back and to the right. Mark said when he shot the first shot, he was standing in the hallway, yet the shell casing was found in the dining room, basically on the opposite side of the room from where he had indicated. When they lifted the carpet where Roger's head was laying, investigators found a bullet lodged into the floor. This could only occur if Mark was standing over Roger when he shot the second time. A closer examination of the 911 call Mark made showed many signs of deception. For instance, he started the call with "please help me" and continued to ask for help for himself. He tells the operator that he is the one who needs help when the operator asks if he needs an ambulance. When the operator asks Mark if the man is still in the house, he avoids the question by stating that the man beat his wife and refers to Roger as "this man," indicating the man might not have been a total stranger to Mark. Mark tells the operator the reason he shot the man was because he was killing his wife and makes it clear that there is one bullet in the man, not two. He was heard saying about Roger, "He's laying on the floor with a bullet in his head." He also mentions that the man was making weird noises before hanging up the phone after claiming his baby is crying. In the background of the 911 call, a man can be heard groaning just as Mark tells the operator there's a man laying on the floor and that he's making weird sounds.
A man in my house. He's inside your house. He's in my house. He killed me. He beat my wife.
Where's the man at?
He's laying on the floor.
Is he dead?
I don't know. He's making weird sounds.
Did you hear it? Mark was trying to deceive everyone around him into thinking he was the victim. His actions during the 911 call were deliberate and self-serving. He was trying to make himself more sympathetic to the operator by saying please and yes ma'am. He kept asking for help for himself instead of Donnah, and he kept trying to tell the operator why he shot the man when it wasn't the question being asked. And most of all, he wanted his stress and concern to seem real and believable. Investigators found evidence that Mark had invited Roger to their house on the day of the murders. Doug explains why and how Mark invited Roger to their house on the day he died.
He set up a murder. He had indicated to Deanne Schultz that he wanted out of the marriage. He didn't want a divorce. He didn't want maybe to make child support payments. He wanted to figure out a way to kill Donnah. He finally figured out, after the Roger Harrington ride on BART transportation, that he could use Roger as a patsy. He called him up, invited him over.
The prosecutor for the case indicates why Roger would go to the Winger household.
He was an individual that went there to try to apologize to get his job back. He wanted his job back so he could continue to live his life. In the car is a note with the address of the Wingers with a time. And you put those things together, it shows that Mark isn't being truthful about who this stranger that just came to his house. He was invited there or lured.
When Roger arrived at their home, Doug says that's when Mark let Roger in.
Roger Harrington shows up thinking he's going to have a meeting to apologize. Donnah is in the master bedroom with Bailey, totally out of the discussion.
Roger was holding a portable coffee cup and a pack of cigarettes, which he set down on the dining room table. Mark then motioned for Roger to follow him to the kitchen where Donnah's handwritten note was on the refrigerator door. That's when Mark pulled out the gun, which was likely on top of the fridge, and told Roger to get on his knees in the dining room because Roger was noticeably taller than Mark. Mark fired the first shot into the top of Roger's head. Donnah came running out of the bedroom when she heard the shot. When she saw Roger on the dining room floor, she turned to run for the front door, but Mark attacked her with the hammer before she could escape. This is why the blood spatter was found in a different location than where Mark had indicated to police he saw Roger attacking Donnah. At this point, Mark called 911. Realizing Roger wasn't dead, he made up the excuse that his baby was crying and hung up the phone. He then rolled Roger over and shot him for a second time, leaving him face up as the paramedics found him. This is why the neighbor heard the second shot about 5 minutes after the first one. When he was on the phone with 911 the second time, he dropped the phone saying he was trying to get to his wife. This is when it's believed he picked Donnah up and rubbed her head wound on his shirt to cover up the blood spatter, then set her back on the floor face down, as if trying to conceal her face like most killers who know their victims do. Notice how Roger, a stranger to Mark, was found face up. On August 23, 2001, police arrest Mark at his office and charged him with Donnah and Roger's deaths. It seemed that Mark's motive was money. Donnah had a life insurance policy for $200,000, and Mark had attempted to sue the airport shuttle company. Mark thought he could use the airport shuttle service story Donnah had told him to his advantage. Charles explained why the case was overlooked and closed so quickly.
I myself and the other investigators didn't pay as close of attention as we probably should have to the exact positions of the body.
Tom Bevel points to the Polaroids taken by the responding officer as a solid evidence that helped explain how the deaths occurred.
If the 3 photographs were there when the first arriving detectives get there, I think this case originally takes a different turn.
Mark pled not guilty at trial. The prosecutor explained some of the key evidence in the case that helped convict Mark.
Mark probably watched too many movies. These graphic movies show him getting blown backwards.
If you are shot and your body ceases to live, you drop. When you looked at the evidence, some pieces stood out more than others. One that stood out to me was Roger Harrington's hands and his shoes and socks, absolutely free of blood.
The most important elements of this case were the 3 Polaroid pictures Officer Dave Behringer took. They showed us the positions of the bodies, the blood spatter analysis, and the testimony of Deanne Schultz put together are all the circumstances that come together beyond a reasonable doubt.
And when you put all those factors together, it became readily apparent that Mark Winger was not in fact a husband that had to defend his wife from a psychotic killer, but was in fact himself a killer who took 2 innocent people's lives.
The beauty of forensic evidence, and I say this many times, the beauty of a fingerprint, the beauty of DNA is it doesn't have an interest, bias, a prejudice, or a motive. It is what it is. And that constant of the forensics in this case showed the other evidence for what it was. It let it be a building block to show the judge and the jury, our community, what happened. And I was thankful that we had it.
The trial lasted 3 weeks, and on May 29th, 2002, Mark Winger was found guilty of both murders. On August 23rd, 2002, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The prosecutor on the case had this to say about Roger.
Roger was not a violent individual. He was not a homicidal maniac, as Mark tried to portray him. He was an individual that, like many Americans, have a mental illness, or had a mental illness, and it was being addressed.
Roger's parents shared their feelings about Mark's conviction.
They cleared his name and put it, like they said that we buried him a murderer.
Yeah, thank you, Tom Bell. I mean, I hope someday I can meet you face to face.
Donnah's father shares his thoughts about the verdict.
I want people to be aware of the brutality that can happen in a home of an upper middle class couple, that everybody around them is just a loving, wonderful couple, but we never know what goes on behind closed doors.
Doug explains how this particular case was a lesson to learn from for not only him, but for the Springfield, Illinois Police Department as well.
I still think about this case on a daily basis. It still affects the way that I do my job. It affects the way that others do their job here at the Springfield Police Department.
The prosecutor credits the way investigators took a closer look at the evidence and let the evidence tell the story rather than creating a story to fit the scene.
Charlie, Doug, they took a second look at the case. They kept developing the leads. They kept following the evidence and letting it take them to where it went. And that's the hallmark of a good police officer.
More officers could stand to take a lesson from Charles because he was willing to admit he was wrong for the sake of the victim and the victim's family getting the closure they deserve.
I'm most proud of the fact that I had a partner as good as Doug, that he didn't allow it to just rest, that I was man enough to admit I was wrong. I learned a lot on this case. It's helped me to be a better detective and a better investigator overall. Because of the mistakes I made, they could have been catastrophic, and I won't never let that happen again.
In June 2005, just as Mark was getting used to life in prison at the Pontiac Correctional Center, an inmate called a private investigator with some information about Mark. It turned out that Mark was planning to have Deanne Schultz kidnapped and murdered out of revenge, and in order to have his charges dropped, mistakenly thinking she was the only evidence that had convicted him. The inmate called the private investigator because they had worked on his case, so he trusted them to tell the authorities, and they did. The inmate said Mark talked about the plan between 5 and 8 times with him. He was hoping to have Deanne forced into taping a video in which she recants her testimony before dying of an apparent suicide. Mark's MO, the way he operates when committing a crime, was apparently staging crime scenes. When the inmate was able to produce 19 pages of Mark's handwritten instructions, Mark was moved to solitary confinement, or administrative segregation as they like to call it, for a month while they investigated the allegations. On July 21, 2005, Mark was found guilty of breaking several rules while creating his plan to eliminate a witness and was sent to serve 1 year in disciplinary segregation without access to the recreation yard. He started the sentence in August 2005, and not long after, on August 16, 2005, Mark filed a grievance objecting the disciplinary segregation sentence. He claimed that Illinois law only allows for up to 90 days of recreation privileges to be taken away. The grievance was denied in October 2005. Mark then submitted an appeal to the decision on October 14, 2005. This led to a video interview with a prison administrator on December 14, 2005. Mark was again looking for compensation for the lack of yard time. The decision was made on January 9, 2006 to reject the appeal. Mark eventually received 1 hour of yard time in April 2006 after he sent his counselor a letter dated April 15, 2006 indicating that he has mentioned to his prison psychiatrist twice that he was having issues relating to the lack of recreation time. 2 weeks later, on April 30th, 2006, he was allowed 1 hour of yard time, after which he sent a letter to the counselor thanking them for intervening. Mark continued to see the prison psychiatrist and told him that he was experiencing anxiety because of the charges he was facing for solicitation to commit murder. Mark appeared in court for the charges of solicitation to commit murder in May 2006. In June 2006, Mark submitted another grievance complaining of the lack of yard time. Even though his sentence in solitary confinement was almost up, he wanted to document the denial of yard time. That same month, he was moved to another prison where his yard time was reinstated. Mark then decided to sue the Pontiac Correctional Center and those involved in rejecting his appeals. Mark had only been objecting to the length of yard time that had been taken from him. In the lawsuit, he was now complaining about his ability to exercise and the impact it had on his physical and mental health. The previous appeal had been denied because it was thought by officials that he had the room to do so in his cell and did not complain of physical or psychological stress. He had the opportunity to mention this again in his October appeal and video interview in December, but again did not mention that the lack of yard time contributed to his physical or psychological stress. At his deposition, Mark testified that while in segregation, his cell was about 6 feet by 12 feet. And he had about 2 feet by 10 feet available for exercise. He said he had attempted jumping jacks and running in place, but found it very difficult without banging his knees or elbows on either the bunk or the cell walls. He also testified that exercise was difficult due to the lack of air circulation and stifling heat in both the summer and winter. He said that the filthy condition of his cell and poor air quality, which he attributed to human waste and the pepper spray used on unruly inmates, hindered his exercises. He testified that he had also attempted sit-ups and other exercises on his bed, but that this left the bed soaked in sweat. He noted, too, that the floor was too narrow for push-ups and was contaminated by feces, urine, mouse and cockroach droppings, and even cockroaches. Even though these are horrible conditions to live in, the judge in the case ruled that it wasn't reason enough for Mark to sue the correctional facility and the members involved in the appellant process, and his lawsuit was dropped. In 2007, Mark stood trial for his murder-for-hire plot. The inmate who told authorities about Mark's plan was a star witness in the case. If he weren't convicted of murder charges himself, he might have been Mark's next target. The second key piece of evidence in the case was the 19-page note handwritten by Mark that he gave to the inmate. Mark detailed how he wanted Deanne's death to play out. He said to make sure it was only her prints and DNA on the videotape confession, the letters she was to write, and the envelopes and stamps. It turned out that Deanne wasn't the only one Mark wanted dead. An old friend of Mark's, who was a businessman, declined to post the $1 million bond for him, and he was still mad about it. Mark's plan for him was a bit different from his plans for Deanne. Mark wanted the man and his family kidnapped, the man separated from his family, then asking the man for ransom in exchange for letting them go. Mark planned to have the man and his family killed and pay the hitman with the ransom money. Mark also wrote in the notes that if there was any money left over from the ransom, to use some of it to have Donnah's stepfather killed, simply because he disliked him. Mark's defense was that there wasn't much to do in prison and he didn't think his thoughts would be taken seriously. The inmate testified that he didn't take Mark serious at first, but when he kept asking, he played along with him. Since one of the people targeted lived out of Illinois, the FBI soon got involved. They said they went through the proper procedures in order to have the inmate wear a wire to capture Mark's plan on tape. The inmate agreed to wear the wire and captured Mark telling him a few things, including that he doesn't care where they bury Deanne as long as it's 30 feet. When asked about the other man he wanted to hold for ransom and how much money they should ask for, Mark said the man told him he had $100 million in the bank and that he had a luxury penthouse in Chicago that took up an entire floor of a building and even had a wave pool. Mark said the last time he saw the man was in 1981 and had last spoke to him on the phone in 2001, but indicated the man was very stingy with his money, so he must still have plenty of it. Mark was heard on the recording telling the inmate his plan was to get out of prison and to work for the inmate as a hitman, as Mark was looking for opportunities to make money. He said he would even do his first job for room and board, saying he knew he could pull the trigger. In return for turning Mark in, the inmate was transferred to a better prison where he was able to have a job. He asked for his mother's phone bill to be paid, and he received $3,250. Mark was found guilty and sentenced to an additional 2 sentences of 35 years in prison for solicitation to commit murder. Before being sentenced, Mark's lawyer insisted that Mark was not a sociopath, but a sociable soul. Mark tried his best not to look like a sociopath by saying exactly what he thought the judge wanted to hear. And of course, his best wasn't good enough. He said, "I love people. The only thing I love more than people is more people." The judge in the case called Mark a threat to the public. Donnah's mother and stepfather were at the trial. Her stepfather said after the sentence was read, he saw Mark in handcuffs with chains around his ankles and said to him, "Your miserable life is over." Mark filed an appeal for the additional sentences on January 26, 2011, stating that the tape recording obtained by the FBI was not filed correctly, and no record of the document exists. The FBI agent who submitted the document and oversaw the recording process had testified that they filed the proper paperwork in anticipation that the case would be going to trial, and they wanted to make sure that the evidence could be submitted. The FBI agent had since passed away, and the document could not be found in FBI records. The appeal claimed the 19-page note was meant as a fantasy to pass the time and vent his frustration about being wrongfully convicted. He also claimed he felt the inmate was scamming him, but he couldn't confront him because he was extremely dangerous. This might explain why Mark didn't put a hit on the inmate. Mark submitted another appeal with the Chicago Court of Appeals on April 5, 2013 to appeal the decision of the lawsuit in which he claimed the parties named in the lawsuit knew he was suffering from lack of yard time. He had his decision 3 days later on April 8, 2013. The appellate court recognized that taking away his yard privileges for more than 90 days was excessive. This is why they reviewed the appeal. Mark claimed that while he was in solitary confinement for 1 year, he was only allowed out of his cell one time to exercise, which lasted 1 hour. This was when the counselor had recommended the 1 hour of yard time in April 2006. He said this violated the 8th Amendment, which states, "Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishment inflicted." The appellate court concluded that no one mentioned in the suit was aware that the lack of yard time was causing him physical and psychological stress at the time he was in solitary confinement, because he only gave this reason when he testified at the deposition. The decision for the lawsuit was upheld. Mark's actions during the crime fit the typical pattern that has been observed in spouses who kill. He used the 911 call as a way of setting up an alibi. He kept in contact with investigators during the investigation, inquiring about the case, and he used the loss of his wife to gain sympathy from anyone he could. The case has been depicted in a number of TV shows, one of which was called The Mark Winger Story. When they went to Springfield to film, they contacted the local media for their assistance.
I got a call one day from ABC television out of Los Angeles, and the producer said, "We're wanting to film a sequence here in Springfield called The Mark Winger Story. Could you help us find the lead detective? We can't find Charlie. Cox. We've looked everywhere. I said, Charlie Cox is my cousin.
Mark's second wife, Rebecca, stood by Mark when the case was reopened until his conviction. Rebecca said, "It was hard for me to believe because then I would be the fool." This is what I imagine most people feel like when they stand by someone who lies about their heinous acts. But isn't it much better to be a fool than an enabler or accomplice? Rebecca claimed that she wasn't asked about her side of the story when the TV networks became interested in the case. She said she was hired as a nanny for Bailey by Mark after Donnah's death. She said she had interviews with other wealthy families, but she knew that Bailey needed her help, so she took the job. Her and Mark started dating after a few months, and in 1996, when Bailey was 18 months old, Rebecca married Mark and adopted Bailey as her own. The couple had a child of their own and adopted 2 other children. Before the marriage, Mark had left the Jewish faith and decided to be baptized. The couple stayed involved with the church, and Mark even did repair work around the building. After Mark's conviction, she became the sole provider for all 4 children, including Donnah's daughter Bailey. When Mark was convicted, Rebecca asked for a divorce and received threatening and hostile letters from Mark, but eventually was able to separate herself from him. Detective Doug no longer works for the Springfield Police Department because he has had trouble with PTSD related to the job. He saw some things that I don't want to describe, in particular involving infants, which are said to be the cases that cause a lot of residual trauma in homicide investigators. But he was expected to do the job without complaining, as are most people who work on crime scenes, because if he asked for help in the 1990s, the supervisors would assume he couldn't handle the work and he didn't want to risk his job, so he didn't ask for help. In order to cope, he turned to alcohol to help him sleep at night. There were differing accounts of Doug's behavior while on the job. He claimed he only drank after work, but there were times when his co-workers thought he was drinking during his shifts. In 2011, Doug failed his firearms training and was sent home. He had been taking a lot of sick time off of work and continued to use the rest of his sick days until he resigned in October of 2011. Doug applied for disability from the police pension board for the PTSD and the symptoms he experienced stemming from it. It seemed like the pension board tried to make an example out of Doug's case so that no other employee would feel comfortable seeking help. They had 3 psychiatrists speak to Doug. 2 concluded that he was suffering from PTSD, while the third said that Doug was capable of working in the past, so he should be capable of working again now. The pension board concluded, nightmares, panic attacks, stress, flashbacks, and other problems Williamson experienced are consistent with alcoholism. Williamson, instead of avoiding situations that could trigger PTSD-related anxiety, vacationed with the family of Donnah Winger, who was murdered by her husband in a high-profile case investigated by the officer, and regularly drove over Spalding Dam, even though he said that he was haunted by memories of a body he had found there. Williamson, a seasoned homicide investigator, instigated an elaborate scheme to obtain disability pension plan benefits by claiming PTSD, depression, and anxiety disorder, when in fact, he simply had an alcohol problem causing problems at work with absenteeism. Being on the verge of employment termination, he chose to create a ploy for a pension disability benefit. The mentioning of Doug's interaction with Donnah's family was interesting. At one point in their argument, the board cited that Doug's involvement with the television program surrounding the case was evidence to them that it didn't bother him. His involvement could be looked at in another way, where it was cathartic for him to share his story, in turn helping us understand that cases like this do exist, and we should be aware of them so that they aren't constantly repeated. Doug appealed the pension board's decision, and in 2016, the board's decision was upheld, and Doug did not receive his pension. The judge for the appeal stated that Doug didn't present enough evidence to show that he was disabled to the point where it kept him from doing his job. Detective Charles retired from the police department as chief of police in 2009. Donnah is buried in Hollywood, Florida, where she grew up. Roger is buried in St. Francisville, Illinois. He was 27 years old. Roger's father died in 2010, but lived long enough to see Mark convicted for the murder for hire plots. Donna's mother and stepfather have been helping victims of domestic violence ever since Mark was convicted of her murder. They established Donna's Fund at a women's shelter in Florida for victims of domestic violence to help with essentials they need in order to change their current situation. Mark is currently incarcerated at the Menard Correctional Center in Illinois.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention? I've just been handed an urgent and horrifying news story, and I need all of you to stop what you're doing and listen.
Here's what's making news.
Murder for hire. Murder for hire.
Murder for hire.
Murder for hire.
Murder for hire.
Murder for hire.
Murder for hire.
Murder for hire.
Murder for hire.
Murder for hire.
A Muskegon woman is behind bars tonight after police say she tried to hire a hitman to kill her husband.
This happened in Michigan, but the mother of two grew up in Keyport, New Jersey.
Merfeld was caught on camera twice in April trying to hire a hitman to kill her husband, 27-year-old Jacob Merfeld.
The 21-year-old mother of two not only wanted out of her marriage, but she also wanted to cash in on his $400,000 life insurance policy. But the hitman she thought she was hiring in April was an undercover cop who captured her plans on a video that went viral.
The tip came into the sheriff's office last Monday, alerting them of Julia's plan to have her husband killed. The sheriff's office then contacted Muskegon police. The two agencies, along with state police, set up a sting.
This was a very quick and thorough investigation involving all these agencies, and it's safe to say that these agencies prevented a homicide in the city of Muskegon. There's no doubt in my mind.
Muskegon Police, Sheriff's Office, and prosecutors all agree if a tip didn't come in alerting them of the plan, instead of holding an arraignment, they'd be investigating a homicide.
The man who tipped police was talking to us today. He is Carlos Ramos. He says he worked with Merfeld at a Harvey Street restaurant and thought that she was kidding when she first approached him a couple of months ago, but then he realized that she was serious and went to police. That saved a man's life.
When she, started going into details and, hey, I want you to do this, I want you to do that, here's a list of what I want you to take, make it look like a break-in. And she was pretty adamant about it, and that's when I knew she was serious. I was never going to do it. I mean, that's just not, me. And I have a daughter, so I don't want to miss out on my daughter's life over doing something stupid. I just looked at it like, okay, if she's serious, I have to say something. But if it comes, if I go and tell them and it wasn't true, then, they'll be like, well, you came to us with this false information. But I'd rather take that chance and just go anyways. So just to be on the safe side.
Ramos says that he thinks the woman approached him because he's been in prison, but he says he's not going back to prison for anybody.
Melissa Vicino lives next to the couple and spoke to Julia just last weekend. She says they moved into the neighborhood a few months ago with their two kids.
They seem pretty happy. I've never heard an argument. I've never seen altercations between them. Nothing. I'm dumbfounded. I would have never expected it.
Other neighbors we talked to said the same.
What does her brother think of her? I spoke to her brother, who is one of 12 kids. He says his sister's husband, Jacob, is with the Coast Guard and a good man.
It's hard, knowing that your sister did this. I mean, it can't be that good if you did this. It was pretty upsetting.
Yeah.
Because, she laughed about it, and it's not right.
We went by the couple's home, but no one was there. Minutes later, Julia's husband, Jacob, pulled in.
I don't want any comments. No comments. I don't want to say anything because I don't want anything to do with this. No comments.
A car door opens, a woman gets inside, pleasantries are exchanged, and then a murder is planned. Listen.
JC?
Yes. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Okay. So I guess you got a little business to discuss?
Yeah.
Carlos kind of told me a little bit about what was going on, but why don't you go ahead and tell me what, what's up?
Well, not entirely sure. I've been I don't know off the fence. I know I want it done. I'm just trying to figure out when I want it done. It has to be on a Thursday because that's the day that I work. But, actually it could be on a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday now since Carlos isn't working. Harry told you how much, right?
He said you mentioned 50.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How are you gonna work that?
That's what I was wondering. Because with Carlos, I was just gonna give him 8 or 9 grand every few weeks, because that way it's under 10 and everything and all that crap. So I don't know how you want to work that one.
Well, I mean, I would prefer to have something at the beginning. to see, to make sure that you're
the only
you're
problem with
serious
that
about
is
this.
I don't have it until, because it's all his life insurance.
Gotcha.
So.
Well, Carlos said, you know, I mean, how do you want it done? I mean, he mentioned a couple different things to me. So
if it looked like a robbery,
a shot or something first.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we were talking about insulin.
Okay. But you want it to look like a breaking, somebody breaking in?
Well, we were talking about that too, and Carlos was like, oh, well, since I know him, I might be able to get him outside. I have a girlfriend who wants to move in with me, and I don't want her to be scared to move in with me. And if she thinks that we got broken into and then Jake got, you know.
Yeah, that probably she wouldn't want to move in.
Yeah, so I'm kind of afraid of that because I want her to move in with me because I don't want to live there by myself afterwards.
Well, you tell me how you want it done. I mean, I don't know what Carlos told you about me, but I mean, I've done a couple of things like this before, and I mean, I'll get it done, and I just need to know what you want done. I mean, you know, I mean, I can do it any way you want me to, but I just want to know how you want it done.
Really, whatever's easiest. If you can get him outside, that would be great.
Okay.
But I mean, if you absolutely can't, I'll understand. You know.
So you want me to I guess I'm not understanding you. So you don't want it done in the house then?
Because it would be messy in the house.
Yeah, well, do you have any cash laying around that you can kind of give me like a little down payment, like?
Yeah, I can give you. I can give you 100 tomorrow.
Or whatever you got there. Just something to show me that you're serious about this, okay? Bring that with you tomorrow.
Okay.
Checking her calendar, she can't decide on a date for the murder.
Time frame though, can it be either not this week, can it be a week or two from now?
Well, you tell me. It can be any time you want. I'm not you in a hurry.
I was looking at my calendar and I was thinking either the 18th of April or the 25th.
So, Thursdays.
Yeah, Thursdays.
Well, not this Thursday, but the following Thursday, the 18th.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can, you know.
It'd be better if you surprise me, either the 18th or the 25th.
Okay, I won't tell you when it's going to be, but,
Perfect.
you know, and I will tell you, you know, I mean, the less you know, the better, too.
That's why I said surprise me with how you do it.
Okay.
Because, I mean, the more shocked I am when it happens, better.
You don't want him to suffer, so I'll make it quick and
not.
clean.
Perfect.
Okay? I'll make it quick and clean. And I'll just take those things you put on the list, and it's going to be quick in and out. You know, I'll get the key back to you later.
I just want to make it as non-suspicious.
When do you anticipate getting your insurance policy?
I don't know. From one of my buddies told me that his girlfriend was his insurance beneficiary, and the guy was murdered, and she got it relatively quickly. He didn't give me a time frame, but she got it quickly because she wasn't implicated.
Stretch this out for a year, right?
No, it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be longer than that.
Okay. All right. So you know what you're going to bring tomorrow?
Yes, you're going to bring. I'm going to bring house plan map to get up to the room where he's going to hang out, a picture of him, a list of the things you want taken, and a down payment.
Yep.
Right.
We good?
Yep. All right. Thank you very much.
I'll see you tomorrow.
1 o'clock.
Yep. You got my number if anything changes.
Thank you.
Showing a picture of her husband and a floor plan of their house, Merfeld says she wants it to look like a break-in.
How you doing? JC? Okay. See you again? Yeah. What you got for me?
Not a very good drawer, but that's the outline of the house.
Okay.
And this is the street view, like where you're gonna park on the street.
Okay.
Unless you have park way back here.
There's a street here and this is the front door then?
No, there's no street, that's just the lawn.
Okay.
So the street's here, and then the lawn's here, and then the front door's here. This is the porch, the main door. That's the one we always use, and that's the key works to either door though.
Okay.
But this has got an enclosed porch. You gotta go through the front door. And you gotta go through
this goes right into the house?
That goes right in. That's the directions to get to the house.
Okay.
And then this is the relative floor plan. If you go in through the porch door, the main hall.
Which would be this one here, right?
Yep. That's him.
And does he look just like that then?
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much?
Yep.
Okay.
It's not that we weren't getting along, but I mean, it was easier than, as terrible as it sounds, it was easier than divorcing him. You know, I didn't have to worry about the judgment of my family. I didn't have to worry about breaking his heart. Stuff like this. It's like kind of like a clean getaway. I mean, it's going to break my heart when it happens, but I mean, it's something that I've been thinking about for a while. The more I think about it, the more I'm like, I just want a little more time.
The 21-year-old is seen handing over the $100 down payment.
I mean, I've had a little bit of time.
All right. Okay, just so you know, JC, once I leave here today, it's on. Okay? So there's no calling it off. Once I leave from here, I'm planning on doing it. You're going to pay up. Got it? You said, you know, something about a gunshot. So is that how you want me to do it? You want me to shoot him?
Unless you could do it painlessly, you know, breaking his neck, that would...
Well, you know, I would prefer to use either a knife or a gun. It's quick and easy.
Do it instead. It's painless, less painless.
Where do you want me to shoot him? Do you want an open casket, a closed casket? What do you want?
I don't have an open casket. I mean, the most painless way you could possibly do it. I don't care about anything else. Just make it painless. I don't know.
Okay, well, I'm just gonna take him head on there, and I'm gonna shoot him right in the face. Okay. So I'm gonna put a couple rounds right in his noggin, so that there's no accident. You know, no way he's gonna live. I mean, he's gonna die. You understand that? I'd rather do it that way. It's more, you know, rather than sneaking up on the guy and doing it from behind, I'll just take him head on. And, you know, it's like I said, I'll put 2 bullets in his head, so I know he's dead. And then I'm just gonna grab the stuff and I'm out of there. You won't call me for at least a couple weeks after, and then just let me know. You know, give me a date of when you're gonna have the cash, my first payment for me. All right?
It's a bad idea for me.
Hey, I'm willing to do it, you know, for whatever your reasons are. I don't really care. You know, I just want the money. I mean, I can use $50,000.
Making me sad.
Well, I mean, you've thought this out, obviously. You know, and like I said, once I leave here today, it's a done deal. It's getting done. Whether you call me later and back out or not, I'm doing it after today. And then you'll get the call and you'll know it's done. So that's the plan. I'm gonna sneak in that door. Sneak up on it.
What happens if you get caught?
Don't worry about that. I'll take the hit. Okay. I'll take the hit. I'm not going to give you up. Okay. You got to make sure you're going to pay me, and I'll send somebody else with the cash. If I get caught, you let me worry about that, but I expect to get my money. Okay.
Just want to make sure that I'm not...
I got people on the outside that'll make sure I get that.
Okay.
Anything else?
I think that's it. Just, can we rule out the 18th, just the 25th and the 2nd, because I want that extra week with
Okay, 25th or the 2nd.
Perfect.
Okay, once I leave, it's a done deal. Okay. I'm not backing out. Okay. I'm just letting you know that up front. I'm not backing out. I'm going to do it, and then I'm going to expect you to pay me.
Okay. I mean, once you do it, I mean, I'm going to pay you either way, so it doesn't matter. I mean,
yeah. All right. All set?
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you. Good luck to you too.
Julia Merfeld could face up to life in prison. Her bond is set at $50,000.
And Merfeld was back home in March. Family members say her 2 children, ages 2 and 4, are now with her in-laws. And despite the plot, her husband says he doesn't want her to go to jail.
Julia Merfeld's parents sat in court behind their daughter in late July.
Standing before a judge today, 21-year-old Julia Merfeld had tears dripping from her face.
A far cry from the same woman who was seen laughing as she told an undercover cop she wanted her husband killed in the front yard.
Is there anything that you would like to say before sentencing?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, go right ahead.
I would like to start out by saying that I do not believe that I'm above punishment. I know that what I did was wrong, and I take full responsibility for it. My tears are not for your pity, Your Honor. My tears are for remorse. Excuse me. Fortunately, the 2 people who matter most have already forgiven me. My husband, who actually sits behind me right now, has already forgiven me. And the second is God. And honestly, they're the only 2 people who matter. I don't want to go to prison, obviously, who does? But if that's where God sees fit to send me through you, Your Honor, then I will take my punishment humbly and without complaint. The Lord has blessed me so much this far, I don't have anything to complain about. Honestly, it could have been worse. The crime that I attempted could have been carried out. And that alone, honestly, is the worst punishment anyone should ever have to endure, and I will endure it for the rest of my life, every single day. I understand that just because I don't want to go to prison doesn't mean that I should not go. There's a passage in the Bible. It's Psalm 119, 67 and 71, and it says, "Before I was afflicted, I went astray, But now have I kept thy word. It is good for me that I have been afflicted, that I might learn thy statutes. And I completely and wholeheartedly agree with that, even if it means a little more affliction, Your Honor. I would rather be incarcerated for however long you deem, knowing that my husband is alive and well, rather than have the crime accomplished. I'm not asking for no punishment, Your Honor. I'm asking you to maybe consider my words, and if you would find it in your heart to give me a little bit of a lighter one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. And Mr. Merfeld, if there's any verbal comments you'd like to make at this time, you feel free to do so, sir.
Yes, I would like to go. I would like to say I start this off by I wholeheartedly forgive my wife for all she has done in this act of hatred. I know that my wife is a wonderful person. She is a godly woman, even so much more so now than she ever has been. And I know that this is a crime that is on the top of the list of the most, I guess, evil, non-godly things you could probably do. But I know my wife, and I've been with her for 4 years, known her for 5, and I know that she is a godly person, and that after talking to her, she's very repentant of the sin she's committed. And before this, she's been a wonderful person, a wonderful wife. I'm sure, as you know, we have 2 young children. She's been nothing but a great mother to them. And I would just like to portray to you, Your Honor, that I don't know what kind of a godly man you are, and I won't ask, it's your opinion. But if you could look in your heart today and just have mercy upon my wife so that she may not have to be away from me and my children for a long time, because I know the young years of a child's life are the most important ones, and I'd like her to be there for every single second that she can. So I just ask in God's name that you would please show mercy as much as you can to my wife. I know she's not beyond punishment, as she stated herself, but I would just ask for a lighter sentence if you could, please, sir. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Merfeld.
That is what you call a very forgiving man.
The spouses have something called learned helplessness. The victimized spouses sometimes don't even want to break away. They feel guilty, brainwashed, they imagine it's their own fault, and sometimes they'll even go to the murderous spouse's defense to try to get leniency in sentencing.
Now, as far as the prosecutor goes, it was pretty clear that he was not buying what she was saying in court today, that he was buying what she said when she did not know she was on camera. Prosecutors pushed for prison.
There's no doubt in my mind that she was willing to carry out this devious plan of killing her husband. It was as though she was ordering groceries or ordering something off a menu as she talked to the undercover officer. So I'm wondering how remorseful she would be had the plan actually been carried out and she had that $400,000 insurance set. How sad she would be at that point in time.
As Merfeld waited for her sentence, she turned to smile at her husband and her parents who sat behind her. Under Michigan's truth in sentencing laws, 5 years, 8 months is what she got, the minimum, which means she'll likely serve at least 5 years and 8 months. Merfeld is serving her sentence at the Huron Valley Prison near Ann Arbor.
More than a month after Julia Merfeld was apologizing in a Muskegon courtroom, her parents are speaking out, telling Inside Edition that she was stupid.
It was an almost surreal scene in court that day. Julia Merfeld's parents sitting behind her, next to her husband, the intended victim. At the time, they chose not to address the judge or the media, but now they say they support their daughter. Her parents say that they're supporting their daughter, and they were amazed at the mercy shown by her husband, the intended target, who forgave his wife.
It was his decision to make, and if he decided that he was going to leave, we would have supported that decision too. I think it was a combination of, boy, if I could get all this money and be free at the same time, well, wow, there's two things. She weighed the good and the bad in her own mind without thinking, oh, What, was I being criminally stupid and thinking of these things?
I love her deeply, but my disappointment in her runs deeper than the ocean. She wants to make amends from this point on. Then my anger just turned to pity.
Well, that's going to do it for all of us here.
Thanks for listening. Follow on Instagram or Twitter. Don't forget to subscribe.